a lot of great people on this one. If you guys could come on screen with us today, Brian Greene, who is the Presidency of the Houston Food Bank. Brian, you couldn't get out of your car for the presentation. What's the deal? So Brian is in his van, or is that a food delivery van, Brian? Is that the deal?
No, that's just my car. I've got a meeting immediately following this, so I wanted to do this from my car. Sorry.
Okay. Well, at some point, I hope you don't drive, and I hope you take off your sunglasses. So thanks for being here. John Puder is here with us as well. John is the Statewide Child Hunger Manager with the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty over at Baylor University. John, thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure to be with you. Not quite as cool as Brian there, but I'll do my best.
Very good. And then also Michael Halligan is going to be with us. Michael, if you could come on camera. Michael is the CEO of God's Pantry. And Craig, you can go ahead and mute your video so that you're not on camera anymore. So that would be good.
Bob, this is Michael Halligan. I am online, but the host has my camera blocked. So if I could ask the host to open my camera, that would be great.
Yeah, let's do that if we can. That would be wonderful. So we'll work on doing.
There we go.
Michael, very good. Nice to have you here. And where is God's Pantry at, Michael? I know that you're the CEO there of the God's Pantry Food Bank.
Bob, we're based in Lexington, Kentucky. We serve central and eastern Kentucky, 50 counties. We have 4 of the 10 most food insecure counties in the nation in our service area.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here, Michael.
You bet.
Brian Greene, let me start with you, since ostensibly you are in the largest food bank in the world, and I know you would probably say the best food bank in the world. So I wonder, Brian, when we talk about feeding food insecure kids, for you and for your team, sort of what's the key issue here when we talk about feeding insecure kids, Brian?
Well, the biggest thing that I would point out is I do think that it's a mistake to see this as a food issue. It's an income issue, and the reason why that's a mistake is when we see this as a food issue, we have a tendency to then look at the solution as, okay, how are you going to get the food to them? And that's really the least effective way to be dealing with. This is an income issue, and so it's the families having sufficient income to not need this. And this is where when Craig's talking about the improvements that we can do of thinking of SNAP as a universal basic income, it really is probably the greatest way for us to feed kids. We saw that, and actually have seen this in the pandemic, is when the things like, well, the child tax credit, the impact that had on our lives was very significant. People not needing to access food this way. So when I think about feeding kids, the best way is for their families to be able to take care of them, and if they had the money, they would.
Yeah, very good. John, one of the things that we've talked about today is summer food programs. And when we talk about kids, Brian and I have had this conversation for the last 20 years talking about summer food feeding. When you think about summer programs and how we might capitalize on some of the investments that the USDA has made around this, what could we do in a place like Texas or in Kentucky and other states to really capitalize on summer food?
I think one of the things we've really learned a great deal from the pandemic. The challenges we have been facing year after year of trying to get kids fed during the summer months is a challenge that we've been fighting for a long time. It's trying to figure out how do we get these children who are relying upon free and reduced price meals, free breakfast, free lunch, sometimes an after school meal. How do we make sure these kids get a meal during the summer? And it's been a challenge we've faced for quite some time. But what we learned from the pandemic is that if we prioritize feeding kids as opposed to dealing with a lot of the bureaucratic issues that are involved with the process of working through regulations, if we put the regulations aside, we can feed kids. We saw that when we did things like getting away with rules that demanded congregate feeding. And that congregate feeding was simply so that the regulations could ensure that the kids were eating the meals they were being served as opposed to taking them home. Who cares where the kids eat the meal? The regulations that did away with, we can only feed them one meal at a time. Regulations that said, we got to prove that the kid is with the parent before we pick them up. When all those waivers were put in place to deal with food insecurity, with feeding kids, what we found was we fed a lot more kids. This past summer, we fed more kids summer meals than we've ever done before. And the only explanation that's out there is that we got rid of the rules. We put the rules aside and we fed the kids. Now, if you're more concerned with making sure we have the rules in place, we can go back to where we were 2 years ago, 3 years ago in the past, and just fight this uphill battle constantly, summer after summer. Let's finally decide we're going to put the kids first, get rid of some of these regulations, and feed kids.
It is interesting, right, that we love rules in America because we don't want there to be any fraud. But when you just look at the basic example of what happened, it's just incredible what we could do with just a little bit of, I mean, your point exactly right, just relaxing some of these rules. Michael Halligan, from your vantage point and your community, what becomes some of the sort of key issues for you guys in feeding kids and families?
You know, Bob, one of the things that we learned very quickly as the pandemic began to unfold is how important the private and public sectors are at addressing food insecurity. And Brian mentioned a minute ago, we can't think about it as a food issue. We have to think about it as an income issue. There were people who were faced with hunger, who had never been hungry before in their lives, simply because they had a job in the hospitality industry in a restaurant, and all of a sudden those establishments were closed. So the economic impact on people's lives in a pandemic made it critically important for us to recognize that our supply chain had to be resilient, our supply chain had to be flexible, and our supply chain needed to think uniquely about the way to get food to people in very unusual circumstances. So the public-private partnership is really, really important. We actually saw donations go down a little bit at the same time that government funding and food was going up, right? So that balance was so important. We saw volunteers that were no longer able to volunteer because they were hunkered down, avoiding, COVID-19. And so we had to find ways of being flexible. In the case of Kentucky, it was the National Guard that stepped in to help us maintain the distribution services. Specific to kids, and one of the things that John mentioned a minute ago that I think is really, really important, there have been 10 years of demonstration tests on the importance of EBT cards in the summer and the importance of being able to get food to kids who aren't in school and who don't have the transportation access for congregate feeding. The summer EBT card and the pandemic EBT card are one and the same. They essentially work the same way. And we proved beyond a shadow of a doubt how incredibly valuable that particular benefit is in the summertime when kids are not in school and they don't have access to congregate feeding sites. So that's just one example of the importance of private-public partnership, a broad, robust supply chain with lots of flexibility as the environment around us changes.
Michael, I want to ask you about sort of politics in a very sort of broad sense, because many times people see this as just an issue affecting urban America and its biggest cities. And when indeed sort of the range of this, it's rural, it's urban, it's agricultural, agriculture is a part of this. This is a problem affecting Americans, not politics, right? Talk a little bit about that, Michael.
So a couple of interesting statistics. First of all, I was born and raised in Muscatine County, Iowa. So I'm a farm boy from Iowa. Lexington, Kentucky, and central and eastern Kentucky is very rural. Food insecurity in our 50 county service area is 16.5%. And that was before the pandemic. Across the United States, it's about 11.5%. So our food insecurity is roughly 50% higher than the national average. And folks that need to get food, so again, going back to Brian's point a moment ago about it being an economic issue, folks who are living in rural America may have to drive 25 or 30 miles simply to get to a grocery store. When I was a kid growing up, we would build our Sunday around going to church, going to the grocery store, and then having a family gathering at the end of the day. That was our entire day. It took us 45 minutes just to get to town to go to church and then go to the grocery store. So imagine not having the economic support to be able to afford gasoline to drive 30 miles to get groceries. That's food insecurity in rural America. And while the numbers are dramatically larger in a large urban area because of the concentration of people, the percentages are dramatically higher in rural America. In our service area, it's 250,000 people. And that's 250,000 people out of about 1.5 million overall. So a very large percentage spread over 16,000 square miles.
Wow, very good. Brian, I wonder if we were to combine sort of the increase in benefits that Craig mentioned and relaxing some of the rules, as John mentioned, and approach this in a bipartisan way, as we've talked about, could we solve this? Could we solve this challenge, or would there still be more to do?
Well, I would say that when you're talking child hunger, it's easier. There's an interesting phenomenon that children are more likely to live in poverty, more likely to live in food insecure households that experience hunger, far less likely to go hungry than the adults, because the parents will sacrifice before they let the kids sacrifice. So if you were to talk about hunger itself, just generally for the family, would I say that we would, through these mechanisms, we would get there? No, because it's the larger income question. There's a huge substitution effect that a lot of times we like to pretend isn't there, but it really is. And these families struggling to pay their rent, their utility bills, so much of our food assistance is actually going to help them pay their rent and their utility bills and other expenses. And so more resources, if they're not enough to keep going, to cover everything, thinking that it's just going to address that one bucket is naive. Now the qualifier is, well, because it's the kids, you're actually much closer to finishing distance, because yes, the parents are going to favor the kids, and so if they can make it so the kid isn't going hungry at all, they're probably going to take that deal, even though they're still struggling to pay the rent and stuff.
Brian, I know that you and I have talked about this before, but schools can play such a large role in helping us in terms of addressing child food insecurity. We still see so many schools that aren't doing the best job that they could, and not even close in some cases. What's your reaction to that?
Well, again, it's when the problem is perceived as they, and then this other group, and the people on the outside, and the sympathy and the empathy, isn't there. But we have shown the incredible power that schools have in moving to universal lunch and breakfast, and what it does for child food insecurity, is far more than Mike Halligan and I will ever accomplish. What the schools do, and the schools that embrace it make a big difference. The schools that don't, well, they get almost what people are wanting them to get.
Yeah, John, from your perspective, whenever Brian and I have gone to this Texas legislature to get legislation passed to sort of alleviate hunger, the only way it happens is if you get the agriculture industry to back you up, and we sort of show it to be a subsidy for Texas agriculture, right? If you address this, is there a way around that, or should we just ride that pony?
Well, first of all, I believe in gathering every single ally I possibly can in my fight. So if you've got the agriculture folks with you, get them with you. One of my biggest partners is Dairy Max, and they're all about milk, right? But our partnership with Dairy Max means that I can convince more schools to do breakfast and lunch and expand the growth. I would say one thing though, Brian, Bob, one of the things Brian was talking about, and you were talking about, was the schools, is looking at the child nutrition departments is different than looking at the administration. When the pandemic first hit in March of 2020, we all ran home and hid behind Zoom cameras. We're still back behind them, right? Administrators, teachers, librarians, everybody ran behind the Zoom camera for safety. But the child nutrition staff got out from behind the kitchen, went to the curbs, and served meals. We need to acknowledge what they're doing. We need to acknowledge that they put their lives out there for us, and really, really hit home. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
It's interesting, right? At Children at Risk, we do these Advocates of the Year, and last is the cafeteria ladies from Dallas, right? The ones that appeared on the cover of Time magazine. I mean,
Right.
Those cafeteria ladies, which have, we've tormented as kids forever, but they were part of the heroes, weren't they, during all of this in terms of making
Absolutely.
sure we're fed. Yeah, that was a big deal. John, when you think about solving this, so similar to some of the questions I've asked Michael and Brian, are there any things that you would add to some of those solutions?
I think the thing that makes things work is the partnerships, and making sure that leadership understands that if we're going to address this issue, we need to start making priority of the kids first. So some of the stuff I talked about before, I hear this over and over again, both from my school districts and from my community partners like the Houston Food Bank and City of Houston Parks and Recs. We got to do away with congregate feeding. We've got to allow for multiple meals, and we've got to be creative. I mean, one of the things that we've been working at BCHIP is the whole idea of in the rural communities, partnering with delivery services and other groups to deliver meals directly to the home, right? So if Amazon can bring you stuff, why can't we use delivery services to deliver meals, a big box of meals for kids, so that it provides a meal for every kid a week's worth? We've seen that this can be incredibly successful. And if we can do it in the rural communities, why can't we do that in apartment communities here in Houston? Why can't we do that in other places? I mean, we've got to be creative in how we address some of these issues. So it's going to be the partnerships with the schools, with our nonprofits, and with the private sector in many ways to make this stuff happen. It's not simple, but I think it's solvable.
Right before the pandemic, an award was given for sort of innovative programs, and in New York State got an award for that sort of shipping food. I think they call it Pantry, where they would ship food directly to homes. And I think with the pandemic, we would learn some of those lessons and continue to do exactly what you're saying, John, is get our dogs barking as those Amazon deliveries come, right? That's important. Michael, what is the toughest thing for you in running your food bank and in feeding families? What has become the biggest challenge for you guys?
Gosh, I could go lots of different places with that question. Brian made a point earlier about kids and the solutions for addressing childhood hunger being very different than some of the solutions for addressing hunger with adults. And while we're focused on children predominantly today, I want to touch on seniors for a moment. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen through the pandemic is, how do you get food to seniors when seniors can't leave their home? And it kind of speaks to the whole notion of home delivery that John touched on a minute ago. And it cuts across multiple segments of our society, right? There is a huge commodity supplemental food program that is sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture. It works pretty similar to SNAP, but it's targeted for folks 60 years and above. It's designed for people to pick up food at centralized locations. That doesn't work during a pandemic. And for seniors that are transportation bound, that also doesn't work. So it's, how do you meet people where they are, whether it's a senior, whether it's a child, whether it's a teen, whether it's a single mom, whether it's a single adult, whether it's a household? How do you meet people where they are? How do you provide services where people tend to be, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a sporting event, whether it's picking up their children from school, whether it's meeting children at the bus on the way home from school? How do you get services where people are versus making folks go to services because it's convenient for us? So we're completely redoing our whole supply chain with that orientation of meeting people where they are. That becomes more expensive, but it's also far better service. So how do we balance the financial costs with the efficiencies and the effectiveness of meeting people where they are?
Excellent. Very good. Brian, how about you? What's your biggest challenge in making sure that you guys try to conquer food insecurity with families?
Well, like Mike, only we're fortunate to live in Houston instead of Kentucky. So, I mean, that part's a little better.
We can debate that more later, Brian.
But like Mike, we kind of have our niche, because, we take advantage of, there's surplus food that becomes our resource. We can rally volunteers, and this is what we do. And we just, basically try to do the best we can with the resources we get, knowing that we will not actually win, but we can reduce suffering quite a bit. And we can definitely help better lives. But we run logistics organizations to try and do the best we can to then channel the food where it's most needed. And I think, John made a really good point. Is like, if we're thinking of this as a logistics question, which food banks essentially are forced to do because that's the resource we have to work with, even though we will admit, ultimately, that's not how the best solution is. But if this is what we've got, do it. These are logistics challenges. What can you do to reduce logistics challenges? And this is where it goes right back to John's point. What are the stupid rules that we put in place on how we can do this logistics, that you could actually help these people a whole lot more if you were actually focused on them, rather than, how do I make sure that it's not possible for some kid to get a meal that they don't deserve, which is a silly question. We do know, and we have learned, that it's so much easier to feed these kids if you're not forcing them to go to a place that they didn't want to go to otherwise, and then sit down and eat their meal there, and then they can go on about their lives. The logistics have changed, and we can do this so much more efficiently. And you look at certainly the lessons from the pandemic and before, the financial feasibility of home delivery is just completely different than what it was 3 years ago. There's now companies. I was talking to one company, Omoja, and that they've been working with food banks, and they figured out a very cost-effective. As a matter of fact, they've been working with you, John. A very cost-effective, home delivery model that, why not help people that way?
Wow, very good. And Brian, is the biggest lesson that we learned from the pandemic about congregate learning in terms of the one rule? If we were going to eliminate one rule or two rules, is that the first one you'd eliminate, the congregate learning or congregate feeding rule?
Well, if I have any, if I get to eliminate a rule, I give the families the money. I give them the purchasing power. That's what I would do. But if you weren't allowed to do that, I would say, the congregate feeding rule would be the easiest thing to change. There's already so much proof that it works. And I just don't see much constituency behind it anymore, John. I mean, I know you've been looking at this heavily, but from a feasibility standpoint in Congress, I think that's a win we can actually get.
Yes.
John, do you agree with that?
No, I agree. I think everybody I talk to, every advocacy group I work with, whether it's whether it's No Kid Hungry campaign, whether it's us, everybody we talk to agrees that the lesson learned is we got to get away from congregate feeding. I think the other thing, so what Brian was saying is absolutely correct. I mean, if we could just give them the money, right, through pandemic EBT or summer EBT, or through the child tax credit, and God let them go buy their own meals and go to the store, and even to Craig's point, God forbid they might get some sugary substance. I'm okay with that. But providing them the money so that they can buy the food themselves is the best solution. If we can't have that solution, we've got to learn a way to make it easier for people to actually get the food to them. Get away from congregate feeding, allow multiple meals to be picked up, or better yet, delivered. Do away, let mom and dad pick up the meal on the way home, the box of food, without having to have the kid in there to prove I've got 2 kids. Once you've proven you've got the 2 kids, you don't have to bring them every single time. Those 3 rules are the big ones that really, really make it difficult.
How much, along those lines, John, how much the child tax credit, puts money in the pockets of families, and to Craig's, it was a Republican idea to begin with, and for a long time, Republicans supported this child tax credit idea. I think the new legislation sort of makes it more accessible. It's easier. You don't have to file your income tax to get it. It starts coming. How much will that change sort of this dynamic around child hunger, do you think?
It's an interesting question, and we won't know the answer for a while. We're gonna have to see it. But I've talked to a lot of folks, and the idea that putting $250 in the pocket of a household, $250 a month, is going to improve their life so much that they no longer are going to need help on any other front. Just give them that $250 per kid, and they're good. It's kind of hard to believe that that's going to say, well, you know what? I've got money. I don't have to feed I don't have to go and get that free meal for my kid anymore. Yeah. I'm not sure that that's where we're going to get to. I don't think folks. I don't think the border between needing help and not needing help is $250. But I could be wrong. We'll see, and the numbers will prove one way or the other over the next couple of years, assuming we continue the tax credit.
Yeah, Michael,
I would not bet on the other side of that one. I'm with you on that one. We did. The numbers higher. We can reduce. I mean, just the number of families that are falling below that line. Clearly already the experience we've had, it clearly went down. I'm sure Mike saw that in his lines. We saw that in our lines, but the line is still long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Michael, your thoughts on the child tax credit and the idea of eliminating congregate feeding?
Yeah, so I believe in flexibility. At the end of the day, what I think we are trying to do with all of these programs, whether it's SNAP, whether it's child nutrition, is we're trying to provide a bridge for folks to get to a place in life where they are productive and they are prosperous as part of economic development, right? So when I think about child hunger and I think about CNR, the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Policy, there's 3 or 4 things that I think are really important. I don't know that I would completely eliminate congregate feeding, but I would certainly build in flexibility. There are times when kids associating with one another helps with childhood development, which leads to better engagement in the workforce, which leads to more economic prosperity. So I don't know that I would completely eliminate it, but I would certainly make a whole lot of flexibility around congregate feeding requirement. For those where it's a choice between having food and not having food, it clearly gets in the way. When I think about community eligibility, most federal programs are based on a 40% factor. Child programs are based on 50. Why are they different? Shouldn't they be the same? If you add that 10% of community eligibility, the numbers are staggering on the number of kids that get additional support who need that support right now. When I look at summer programs versus after school programs, the nutrition standards are different, the reimbursement rates are different. Why? Shouldn't they just be one program? When I look at the National School Lunch Program, we do a great job with breakfast. We do a great job with lunch. What about supper? And golly gee, couldn't we use those bus routes that are taking kids home to provide some additional meal assistance, right, on a logistics platform that already exists? So those are some of the things that I think are really important from a child nutrition reauthorization, which right now is the time to do it. There's about $10 billion in the reconciliation package that was agreed upon in the last 24 hours ago that's going in front of Congress. That's a great start. We need to get some of those programs in law permanently under child nutrition reauthorization before this congressional session is completed.
Michael, when we think about obstacles, and John, I'll ask you the same question. When we think about obstacles to the success of our current programs as they speak, it's school districts not doing the things that they need to do to make sure the food happens. Brian and I have run into municipal hurdles in terms of delivering summer foods and territorialism. What are some of the things that that sort of gets you super frustrated in terms of some of the current programs in place that provide obstacles to success?
It's interesting. From my perspective, the desire to help is always there. But what's challenging is some people want to help this way, and some people want to help this way, and some people want to help that way, and some people want to help that way. There's no right answer here. There are options, there are alternatives, and it's not about what Mike Halligan wants to do, or what Brian wants to do, or what John wants to do, or about school district X, Y, and Z wants to do. It's about how can we serve our customer? And in this case, our customer is someone who is experiencing hunger, who doesn't have the nutrition that they need to be successful in life and to grow and prosper. So we have to take our lens off of how we would do it, and we have to put our lens on what are the options that are available that we can collaborate on together to make a difference for someone who doesn't have a meal on their table. And if we focus on that, and we focus on the what and the why and not the how, I think we're going to be in a better place. And that's all about collaboration and working together.
Yeah. John, you?
Yeah, so some of the things Michael talked about, I mean, I couldn't agree more. The challenges, and you talk about different school districts do things differently. And that's something I deal with every single day, Doctor. I talk to one school district after another, and the challenges sometimes are superintendents, sometimes they're principals that we have to convince that, if we want to feed kids, we really should be feeding them in the classroom, and we should be feeding them after the bell. Drive by a school 2 minutes before the bell rings in the morning, and you'll see a line of cars where parents are dropping off their kids. I was guilty of it. If the kid's showing up 1 or 2 minutes and running for the class, they don't get breakfast under the traditional model. But if we're feeding them breakfast in the classroom, we could feed every kid. And God help me, I'd rather feed a kid than be concerned about a milk stain on your new rug. And that is you have no idea how that issue is the biggest issue I deal with principals. I got a brand new rug. I don't need milk stains. Give me a break. Let's feed some kids, right? The other issue is, and Michael talked about after school meals. The rules around after school meals are insane. You can't feed them until after the end of the official school day. And then there must be an activity along with it. If we were serious about feeding kids, we'd hand them a boxed lunch as they were getting on the bus to go home. But the rules simply don't allow that. I mean, these are things we could be doing to help feed a whole lot of kids. So I have to agree that if we make the priority feeding kids and not following all the different rules, we could feed so many more kids, and we could address a whole lot more of these issues. I've tried to figure out a way how we can feed kids at the end of the school day, but schools now they're now timing their days in minutes. They don't time them in days. And so the end of the school day ends at exact time, and those kids are gone. And so then trying to get an activity where you have to bring the kids in, we could do this so much better if we were really serious about it. And if we had principals and superintendents who decided that they wanted to make this a priority. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen some superintendents, and I got to tell you, there's some really, really good ones out there. And I've seen some principals who are just awesome. My problem almost never is the child nutrition staff. They want to do it. They come to me and say, John, they won't let me. I can't. I talk to them. And so then I try to advocate on their behalf. But my challenges usually are superintendents and principals. And if somebody's got a way to get milk out of rug stains, man, that would go a long way.
It's interesting, though, that the leadership that superintendents and activist nutrition directors can provide, and the movement they can, it is sort of amazing, right? When I think about the progress that has been made in the Rio Grande Valley, going back a decade now, was because of superintendents who sort of stepped up and said, why aren't we doing more of this? And Brian's heard me tell this story before, but I remember visiting probably a decade ago a school district in the Houston area. This is before we had mandated that the schools with high numbers of low-income families had to serve breakfast. But we visited and we said, why aren't you using USDA money available to you? I said, well, we do breakfast. We just do it during 1 month. We just do it during April when it's testing, because we know they'll do better on testing. That's when we're doing breakfast. And I felt like they just proved their point right then and there, right? The kids will do better academically. So why, if it's free, why don't you just do it the year long? Final fun question, and I'll start with you, Brian. What was your favorite school meal when you went to school as a kid? What was your favorite food?
You know, for some reason in the school system in Eureka, California, Thursday was Turkey Day, and so it was turkey and gravy and mashed potatoes, and I loved it. I look forward to it every Thursday.
How about you, Michael?
You know, Brian and I have known each other for a very long time, and this is the first time that I realized that he and I both love mashed potatoes and turkey. And I'm also a little bit of a meatloaf fan. I was born and raised in rural Iowa, so things that stick to my bones help me get through the day. And those are the three foods that I remember most as a child growing up: mashed potatoes, turkey, and meatloaf. Wow.
John, how about yourself?
Pizza Friday. Pizza Friday. I lived for Pizza Friday.
Oh, I grew up in Puerto Rico, and it was universal free school lunch, right? I mean, we were poor kids, and it was universal. And we had rice and beans every day, different types of rice, different types of beans. But twice a year, we had hot dogs. And believe me, the lines were much longer for those hot dog days. It was like, wow, this is amazing. We get hot dogs. So I'm not necessarily a big hot dog fan, but such variety that it was a great deal. So anyway, John Puder, Michael Halligan, Brian Greene, thank you, Halligan, sorry. Brian Greene, thank you guys very much for the work that you're doing. And thank you for being here and enlightening us today on all of this stuff. This was great material. Thank you guys very, very much. And Brian, stay safe in your car. I'm glad you stopped the car at least. So that was good. Very good. All right.
Thanks a lot, Bob, for the
guys.
opportunity.
And Brian, go Astros.